The coronavirus pandemic is causing large-scale loss of life and severe human suffering globally. It is the largest public health crisis in living memory, which has also generated a major economic crisis with a halt in production in affected countries, a collapse in consumption and confidence, and stock exchanges responding negatively to heightened uncertainties. In trying to limit the spread of COVID-19, policymakers globally have the difficult task of balancing the positive health effects of lockdowns against their economic costs, particularly the burdens lockdowns impose on low-income and food-insecure households. In the case of South Africa, the lockdown policies are relatively stringent and the economic impacts large. Since the lockdown was first imposed on March 27, 2020, it has been a battle for Africa's most industrialized nation. There have been more than 2.2 million cases confirmed, 1.92 million South Africans have recovered, and more than 64,000 have died. While the economic cost cannot compare to the loss of loved ones, the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns and restrictions in South Africa have hit the economy hard. South Africa's economy lost 2.2 million jobs in the second quarter of 2020 during the lockdown. This was the biggest fall in job numbers since the employment survey began in 2008. On Sunday, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that the level 4 lockdown would remain in place. South Africa is in the midst of its third wave and has also confirmed the fast-spreading Delta variant is now the dominant variant in the country. The pandemic comes at a time where South Africa is battling a recession. It also is happening as South Africa's unemployment rate rose to a new record high of 32.6%. The rate was the highest since the quarterly labor force survey began in 2008. What are the implications of the lockdown, restrictions, alcohol ban, and more on South Africa's economy? We'll get into that today. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me on today's show is Tomi Moyan. He is a Pan-African media executive as well as a development consultant, and he joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Tomi, welcome again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tolulope, and thank you to your listeners this morning. Good morning.
All right, so before the president announced a return to lockdown level 4 over the weekend, well, actually about 2 weeks ago, then he said there would be a review of how that was going, which happened on Sunday. Were we seeing South Africa's economy starting to open up again? Did we see that it looked like the country was on the path to reopening 2 weeks ago?
Definitely, yes, Tolulope, thank you for the question. Definitely, there was economic activity in the country began to open up after we moved to level 1. You know, I'm sure you follow the trend of how the lockdown have outplayed in South Africa. And what was happening before the level 4 was a recovery. Businesses were opened, even though not in full capacity, but we saw where they have started recovering from last year, where there were harsher lockdown, and over the time there has been that recovery. So level 4 just was like a shocker for everyone, but we all know why we had to go back to level 4.
And that goes to my next question now. In terms of the spike in cases, did it really take many South Africans by surprise that the government had to go back to level 4 lockdown? When the president was speaking on July 11th, he said the country for the last 2 weeks had consistently recorded an average of nearly 20,000 daily new cases. So was the return to lockdown level 4 really coming as a surprise to South Africans? Also taking into cognizance that Gauteng province seems to account for the majority of cases that have been coming in recent times.
Well, I won't say for the whole country. I mean, some of us were expectant that we needed to go back to a lockdown, but some sectors like the restaurant sector, the food sector, the alcohol sector, those were the ones that were not really happy with they moved to level 4. But I mean, as a country, we were expecting that, especially if you're following the news and if you're following that the health sector was being strained, the hospitals were being strained with the cases, and there's no capacity to cater for not just those that are affected with COVID-19, but other ailments around the country. So I won't say it was a shock for the entire country. We were expecting that, especially looking at the numbers and how they were going.
All right, so let's get into the economic implications now. And let's look at the supports extended to small and medium-scale enterprises in the country. We know that a number of state entities last year were actually asking for help. The state-owned post office was asking, the airline as well, South Africa Airways was asking as well, the airport facility manager was asking. But when it comes down to it, the backbone of any economy is the SMEs. So the country had the debt relief fund, the Business Growth or Resilience Facility, and also even set up a solidarity fund, which South African businesses, organizations, and individuals, as well as the international community, could contribute to. According to the president, the Unemployment Insurance Fund decided to extend temporary support to workers who lost their income due to level 4 restrictions. And since it came about last year, it has provided more than 60 billion rand to protect jobs. There was also a safety net developed to help persons in the informal sector. So let's look at how successful these initiatives were. Were South Africans really able to take advantage of these initiatives, even though there were also accusations of corruption also being involved, and how difficult it was for South Africans to cut through the bureaucracy to get to the support?
So the way I will answer your question is that, yes, there are businesses both in the private and public sector that has benefited from the relief funds, especially businesses, in the private sector and SMEs and all that. But we must also know that corruption also played its own role. As we have seen, I mean, there were investigations that were carried out on how some of these funds were disbursed, so that we cannot shy away from, which is a very huge scourge that is still that the government is faced with. And the earlier, the better the government of South Africa deals with corruption within its systems, then we will see an improved benefit to other businesses or to businesses. And then, of course, the public sector is also under strain, because even before the lockdown, you will know that the likes of your SAA, South African Airways, have been battling, the likes of your post office have been battling. So it's not, pandemic just made it worse for them, So we need to really face that. And it's a good thing that the government has also, with the announcement made on Sunday, the 11th, it is a good thing that they are extending the UIF, which is the Unemployment Insurance Fund, to businesses and to employees that need the relief. So we need to see how they would do the rollout. They need to effectively do that rollout so that people can benefit, because it's really harsh out there.
Okay, so you've talked about the extension of the insurance fund. Are there any other extensions, any new initiatives, any relief packages? For South Africa to go back into lockdown level 4, you're seeing a situation where, once again, an economy that was struggling to recover is literally going to be ground to a halt. Now, there are some reports that the government is planning this for 21 days, but only announced 2 weeks and then a 2-week review. But people are bracing that this could take some time, especially with the Delta variant.
True, and there's been also conversations from different quarters that the SASSA
Hello, Tomi.
going to roll out different initiatives and different ways to mitigate the problem that is out there when it comes to grant and funding. Of course, all other businesses, small businesses are also in the mix. So there's those kind of initiatives within the small business sector, where they can also help give funding or give grants out to small businesses that are also impacted by the new
Pandemic.
development of the lockdown level 4.
So I have to ask, because I've read the reports on the investigation, which has really flayed the government in terms of how it handled the disbursement of the funds, its alleged mismanagement as well as corruption. Has anyone been held responsible? Is anyone going to pay the price for mismanaging these funds, for diverting these funds? Because it makes it reminiscent of some of the issues with South African Airways in terms of this mismanagement of government resources, of even ESCOM's mismanagement as well. But this is a very pivotal situation. You need to get these funds to people who have lost their jobs, who are food insecure, who are low income households. And if that's not happening, who is going to be held responsible? Is anyone being held responsible as it is right now?
I mean, we hope that people will be held responsible, people that are involved directly or indirectly in the mismanagement of these funds or involved in corruption in one way or the other. The government is assuring that, especially the government of Cyril Ramaphosa is saying, you know what, we cannot continue with the status quo. We cannot continue with having a government that is being infected with corruption. So there are investigations going on. You know, there's also the Zondo Commission looking into a whole lot of things that have happened in the past regime. So it will only be fair for us to keep our fingers crossed and look at how government and how all this will unravel. But yes, investigations are ongoing. So we'll wait for the investigation process to be completed, and we'll see if there are people that will be brought to the book.
All right. Tomi, let's hold on. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we get into one of the most controversial aspects of the lockdowns in South Africa, and that has been the ban on alcohol sales. Now, according to the the Beer Association of South Africa, they're saying that hundreds of thousands of South Africans could lose their jobs if this ban continues. We'll be looking at the economic implications of South Africa's lockdown when we come back. Tomi Moyan is still with me as we take a look at the economic implications of South Africa's lockdown. Now, one of the most controversial aspects of the lockdown in South Africa, Tomi, has been the ban on alcohol sales. The Beer Association of South Africa says that the latest ban, which has been in place since June 28th, has already served a devastating blow to the alcohol industry. It's put an estimated 4,603 jobs at risk, as well as a potential loss of 5.1 billion rand in taxes and excise duties. The association said that over 400,000 livelihoods that depend on the alcohol industry will simply not survive if the current alcohol ban continues any longer. We simply must ensure that we save both lives and livelihoods during the third wave. And you heard in my introduction, that's been the biggest issue that policymakers have had globally. The lockdown is good for health, but the lockdown is bad for the economy. On this particular alcohol issue, is there a compromise? Is there a middle ground? The president basically thinks that gatherings, especially gatherings that involve alcohol, lead to higher numbers of COVID cases. Is there a middle ground, Tomi?
I will say there's a possibility where there can be a middle ground. But if you understand, I've been living in this country for over 15 years. And if you understand the lifestyle of the location where we are in, I think it's a good thing that the government has placed a ban on alcohol because of trends and the history and how we have seen. There's always a report when there's a ban on alcohol that there's a relief on the trauma unit, for instance, of our hospitals, and they are not dealing with trauma cases, and the trauma cases just drops tremendously. So there's always a middle ground, and you must also know that yes, there's the economic impact, but how do we now mitigate between that and a country that the health sector and the health system is also suffering? Yeah. So we need to understand, the Beer Association need to understand that this is for a good cause and it's not going to be forever. And what are they bringing to the table? Because some of their arguments are valid and where some are not just acceptable. Then you have to know that everything within the alcohol sales, it's for commercial purposes and it's for gain. So you need to look at that. But we need to get to a place where the only middle ground we can find here is how can it be so controlled? Maybe they should leave the ban completely and just allow sales within certain hours, which we have seen before, and at certain times or certain days, which we have seen before. And then, those are the kind of middle ground that can be proposed.
What about a bailout for the industry? 400,000 livelihoods attached to it, 4,000 plus jobs possibly in danger, more than 5.1 billion rand in taxes and excise duties. What about a bailout for the alcohol industry in South Africa? Is that too much to ask?
I don't think it's too much to ask, but you must also understand that that industry is a well-established industry, a thriving industry. So I don't think it's too much to ask. They should also see how they can continue their discussions with government, and government, I think, should listen to them. But I don't think it's too much to ask.
All right. So an industry that is associated with alcohol sales and one that has also been hit very hard has been the hospitality and services industry in South Africa. A number of restrictions are back in place right now, and those restrictions are not limited to just them. On the screen, you'll see what the restrictions are for level 4 right now in South Africa. All social, political, and religious gatherings remain prohibited. Curfew remains in place from 9 p.m. until 4 a.m. and only those with permission to leave their homes can do so. Alcohol sales remain prohibited. Schools are still going to stay closed until this 26th of July. You must wear a mask. Now let's get to the restaurants. Restaurants and eateries will be able to operate while observing strict health protocol. Such establishments may not accommodate more than 50 people at a time, or smaller venues more than 50% of normal capacity. It goes on and on. It talks about fitness centers and gyms and other venues, as well as agricultural, livestock, and game auctions. How are businesses, particularly in the services and hospitality sector, meant to survive yet another level 4 lockdown, even if it's just for 2 weeks, even if it's just for 21 days? How are they going to survive?
So these are businesses, especially in the hospitality sector, that needs to enjoy government grants. You know, the government needs to look at those industries and begin to give them the kind of support that is needed. So that, I mean, from last year, many businesses have closed within that sector, and they are the most impacted. And they had a good number in terms of percentage to the GDP of the country. We all know that. So the government really needs to come in and help and assist where they can. They need to really look at it. But we mustn't shy away from the importance of putting the country on lockdown. We mustn't shy away from, because the truth of the matter is, when you go out there, even during level 1 or level 2, you see the kind of lifestyle people adopt. People are no more social distancing. People are not wearing their masks the way they. So everybody goes on a relaxed mode. So at times it's a dual. We have to look at it in with two kind of focal lens, which is we need to, as citizens of a country, need to take responsibility and be responsible in our lifestyle. And then you will see that we will not be, or the government won't have a choice than to give us a relief or a relaxed lockdown. But when we don't do that, the government doesn't have a choice than to bring a lockdown to level 4. For instance, in restaurants, you will see that you can't be eating your food with your mask on or having a drink with your mask on. We know that. But you can also limit the number of people on the table. So you see, on level 1 and level 2, those were not things that were being adhered to or things that were being taken into cognizance. And the government doesn't have a choice. The government has to do what it feels it's best for its citizens.
All right, Tomi, I can't let you go today without touching base with the protests and some of the looting we've seen over the past few days in relation to former President Jacob Zuma's case and the Zondo Commission. Now, adding that to the restrictions and to the lockdown, adding that to a country in recession, adding that to unemployment numbers, what do you think is going to be the economic impact of the protest? They are still ongoing a bit, but we know that the military apparently is being called in to sort of return civil order to some areas that have been hit with the looting and the protest.
I mean, it's indeed a sad time for us as a country. It's indeed a sad time for South Africa at this time with the unrest that we have seen in the last 2 days, especially in Gauteng and in KwaZulu-Natal. But it's going to have its own economic impact on the country. I mean, businesses have suffered a lot. There will be unemployment. The loss to businesses. I mean, malls have been attacked, have been set on fire. Trucks have been set on fire. If you look at the logistics business, and that is in hundreds of millions of rand or dollars, if you want to put it that way. But you see, this is a wake-up call. This is another thing that we need to understand as a government, that this is a wake-up call for the government and for the country to begin to do the right thing, to begin to address issues that need to be addressed and not allow political factionalism or whatever it is that was the foundation of this to happen. Because yes, people have right to protest, like the president said in his address last night. People have right to have a peaceful protest, but you always know that there will be a set of people within the society that will take advantage of that. Right. So in order for us to avoid things like that, we need to set our foundations right and begin to put the proper policies and regulations and the proper infrastructure that is needed for our people in place. Then we will avoid things like that.
All right, Tomi, we'll pause our conversation. We'll stop it here for today. There is a lot more. We've seen that the World Bank has looked at South Africa's annual economic growth rate, and they've also projected that there is going to be an increase. They've moved it from 3.5 to 4%, but those are conversations we'll have to pick up at another time. Tomi Moyan joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. We are keeping a very close eye on issues as they develop in South Africa. And right now, the latest lockdown extension was, of course, inevitable, considering the cases and the prevalence of new variants, according to the Bureau of Economic Research. Now, while the extension has been largely expected, it will still come at a very great cost to the country's economy. And the third wave and the associated restrictions will be a big drag on Q3 2021 GDP for South Africa. As things develop, we will keep you up to date right here on News Central. Up next is NC4 to watch. And we start off with a few stories we're keeping our eyes on with West Africa, where Nigeria will offer 150 billion rand worth, I beg your pardon, South Africa is still in my thoughts, 150 billion naira worth of bonds for subscription in July. The Debt Management Office said this is comprised of 3 bonds worth 50 billion naira each. The bonds, which will be auctioned on July 19th, have a settlement date of July 23rd, 2021. Uganda's coffee exports in June and for the 2020-2021 financial year hit a 30-year record high, according to the Uganda Coffee Development Authority. The East African country exported 618,388 60-kilogram bags worth $58.56 million in June, the highest monthly record since 1991. Now, this was an increase of 47% in quantity and value from a year ago. Coming up third on our list, the group of 7 countries and multilateral partners, including the International Finance Corporation, the African Development Bank, and the European Investment Bank, have announced plans to jointly invest $80 billion in Africa's private sector over the next 5 years. According to the UK government, the funds will go towards supporting the long-term development goals of African economies. Renewable power, agriculture, infrastructure, manufacturing, and technology are some of the sectors set to benefit from the investments. And finally, wrapping up NC4 to watch, Kenya has announced plans to construct a 100 million Kenyan shillings cotton ginnery in Lamu County. Now, the ginnery is expected to process 20,000 metric tons of cotton fiber annually. Cotton farming in Kenya has been on a downward spiral since late 1990, when the country produced more than 38,000 metric tons. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Don't forget to join us 11 a.m. West African time right here on News Central as we take you through the big financial, economic, and business stories that come from here on the continent. You can catch up with whatever you missed on our YouTube channel or by downloading our mobile app. And of course, that is on App Store and your Play Store. You can also watch us live on Star Times channel 274. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. I will see you next time.